Lord help me, I am too pretty to die like this! This is just the beginning.
The lingering phantom weight of Silas's hand on her shoulder faded as Evangeline awoke with a gasp, the cold New Orleans morning air cutting through the screen door of the Rampart Street shotgun house. It had been weeks since that near-fatal encounter in the Garden District, a nightmare. She escaped only when Trixie pulled strings with the local underground to drag her out of that den of wolves, before Silas could realize the truth. Now, Evangeline sat before her own modest vanity, staring at her reflection. Her transition was progressing. The estrogen hormones prescribed by Dr. Charles were beginning to soften the severe high angles of her jawline, rounding out her cheeks with a delicate feminine grace. Yet, her eyes remained guarded. She picked up a tube of lipstick, her hand trembling slightly as she applied a muted plum shade, trying to mask the internal fractures left behind by the man who had tried to erase her existence. The atmosphere at the Velvet Room was thick with daytime hum, the clinking of empty bottles and the scent of floor wax replacing the midnight magic. Evangeline walked through the stage wings for an early rehearsal, her 3-inch patent leather heels clicking against the worn floorboards. Sitting directly on the center of the stage was an enormous bouquet of white Casablanca lilies, their intoxicating, spicy fragrance slicing through the stale smell of tobacco and bourbon. Trixie stood nearby, arms crossed over her vibrant turquoise caftan, her sharp eyes narrowed at a small envelope tucked deep within the pale petals. "Another ghost, Ava," Trixie warned, her voice a low, gravelly rumble. "And this one isn't buying a ticket. He's trying to buy an entrance into your thoughts." Evangeline opened the card. There was no name, only a single sentence written in an elegant, aggressive script. "To the queen who commands the dark." In the dim, wood-paneled office overlooking the club's main floor, Julian Vance sat behind a heavy mahogany desk, a crystal tumbler of single malt scotch catching the amber light of a desk lamp. Across from him stood his primary enforcer, Marcus, whose knuckles bore the fresh, purple bruising of street-level enforcement. Julian's silver hair gleamed as he leaned forward, his tailored charcoal suit unbuttoned at the collar. "The Miami shipment didn't make the docks on Canal Street," Julian stated, his voice a smooth, dangerous baritone that carried the absolute weight of a kingpin. Marcus shifted his weight, his eyes casting downward. "Chase's people intercepted it at the state line, boss. The Miami boys are moving their territory north. They say New Orleans is open season now." Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a cold, calculated curve of a man preparing a tactical execution. "Chase thinks, because he rules the beaches, he can navigate the bayou. Let him bleed a little to learn the difference." Back downstairs, Evangeline stood by the piano, humming a low, melancholic tune to warm up her vocal cords. She couldn't shake the memory of Julian from episode 2, the smooth way he had won her over during that high-stakes bet at the underground casino, securing her trust, and the subsequent intimate dinner where he treated her not as an exotic curiosity, but as a sovereign woman. Yet, the mystery deepens. The lilies weren't his style. Julian was direct, an aggressive force of nature who made his presence known with heavy gold and front-row dominance. These lilies felt distinct, almost dangerous in their anonymity. As she practiced, she noticed Marcus whispering frantically to the bartenders, checking the locks on the side doors. The undercurrent of the city's drug war was beginning to bleed into her sanctuary, turning the velvet-lined walls of the club into a heavily fortified bunker. The clinical, sterile white walls of Dr. Charles's private clinic offered a sharp, jarring contrast to the smoky, dark nightlife of the Velvet Room. Evangeline sat on the examination table, her long mahogany legs draped under a paper sheet. Dr. Charles, a kind-faced, older black woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, reviewed her latest blood panels. "Your hormone levels are exactly where we want them, Evangeline," Dr. Charles said, with a warm smile, adjusting her stethoscope. "The estrogen is adjusting beautifully, and your health metrics are strong. But I see the tension in your shoulders. Transitioning isn't just about what's changing in your blood. It's about the safety of the space you inhabit." Evangeline nodded quietly, looking down at her manicured hands. "The world is getting louder, Doctor. I feel like I'm running out of places to hide." Dr. Charles placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Then you build your own walls, child. Brick by brick." It was a Thursday afternoon, and Evangeline was sitting in the empty dressing room sewing a loose sequin back onto her performance gown. The door opened abruptly, and the club's accountant walked in, holding a thick, plain, manila envelope. "This just arrived by courier for you, Ava. Hand-delivered, paid in full, no return address," he said, placing the heavy packet on her vanity before exiting. Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs as she tore open the seal. Inside lay stacked rows of crisp, uncirculated $100 bills, totaling exactly $5,000. Tucked between the currency was another elegant, unsigned note. "A queen shouldn't lay her head in a shotgun house on Rampart Street. Claim your throne." Evangeline stared at the wealth, her mind racing. Julian had won her heart, but this mysterious provider was funding her escape. On the rain-slicked wooden piers of the Mississippi River, the confrontation turned physical. Julian Vance stood under a rusted iron canopy flanked by 4 heavily armed men. Facing them was a contingent of sleek, white-suited men. The Miami Syndicate. At the front stood Chase's lieutenant, a ruthless enforcer named Santos, who spat into the churning brown water. "Chase sends his regards from Miami, Vance," Santos sneered, gesturing to a crate of contraband sitting between them. "The Gulf belongs to us now. You're an old wolf running out of woods." Julian didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his leather shoes stepping directly into a puddle of oil and rain. With a blindingly fast movement, Julian gripped Santos by his lapels, slamming him against a rusted iron crane. "Tell Chase that if he steps foot in Orleans Parish, I won't just dump his product in the river," Julian whispered, his voice vibrating with absolute malice. "I'll dump his empire." With the mysterious $5,000 safely tucked into her leather handbag, Evangeline stood on the balcony of a pristine, modern apartment building overlooking the French Quarter. The real estate agent handed her the brass keys. "It's yours, Ms. St. James. First month, last month, and security deposit cleared this morning." As the agent walked away, Evangeline walked into the empty, sun-drenched living room. The floors were polished hardwood, the walls a clean canvas of cream. For the first time in her life, she didn't smell Silas's stale peppermint or the damp rot of the Ninth Ward. She smelled fresh paint, potential, and true independence. She leaned against the window pane, clutching the keys tightly to her chest. Whether this was Julian's secret gift or the work of a phantom from Miami, It was her ticket out of the shadows. The neon lights of the Velvet Room hummed a deep violet as the midnight crowd began to filter in. Evangeline stood by the back entrance, getting a breath of humid night air when a sleek silver sports car with Florida license plates pulled slowly up to the curb. The window rolled down, revealing a young, dangerously handsome man with sun-bronzed skin and cold, crystalline blue eyes. It was Chase, the drug lord Kingpin of Miami, visiting the front lines himself. He looked at Evangeline, his gaze lingering on her regal posture and striking mahogany features with an unsettling intensity. "You must be the singer everyone's talking about," Chase said, his voice carrying a smooth coastal drawl. Evangeline, a beautiful name for a woman caught in a dying city. Before she could reply, Julian's primary enforcer, Marcus, stepped into the alleyway, his hand visibly resting inside his jacket. Chase chuckled darkly, rolling up his window and speeding off into the neon-lit fog. A few days later, Evangeline returned to Dr. Charles's office for her routine physical checkup and hormone injection. The quiet safety of the clinic felt like a sanctuary from the escalating tension between Julian and the Miami syndicate. As Dr. Charles prepared the syringe, she noticed a faint, dark bruise on Evangeline's wrist, a remnant of her rushing through the club's back exit during a recent security scare. "The world outside is moving fast, Ava," Dr. Charles said gently, administering the injection with practiced precision. "Your transition is a beautiful rebirth, but a newborn needs protection. Are these men you're surrounding yourself with protecting you, or are they using you as a shield?" Evangeline looked away, the cool sting of the medicine entering her muscle. "Julian loves me, doctor," she murmured, though the uncertainty in her own voice chilled her. Back at her new apartment, Evangeline found Julian waiting for her on the velvet sofa she had recently purchased. He looked exhausted, the lines of stress deep around his eyes from his ongoing war with Chase. But his expression softened completely the moment she walked through the door. He rose, pulling her into a warm, commanding embrace, his scent of expensive cologne and tobacco enveloping her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box containing a stunning gold bracelet studded with tiny, brilliant emeralds. "For my queen," Julian whispered, clipping it onto her wrist. "To match the dress that started it all." Evangeline smiled, leaning her head against his chest, but her eyes locked onto the white Casablanca lilies sitting in a vase across the room. The secret admirer's gifts were still arriving, a silent, beautiful threat to the empire Julian was trying to protect. That evening at the Velvet Room, Evangeline took the stage under a deep sapphire spotlight. The club was packed to capacity, the air electric with anticipation. Julian sat at his permanent VIP table, surrounded by his top lieutenants, his eyes fixed on her with absolute possession. Evangeline gripped the vintage silver microphone, her contralto voice rising through the smoky air like a physical force. She sang a slow, haunting ballad about a woman torn between two kings, her eyes intentionally drifting from Julian's intense gaze to the dark, shadowy corners of the room. In the very back, beneath the exit sign, she caught the brief glint of silver hair and a white suit. Chase was watching her from the dark, a wolf mapping out his rival's most precious treasure. In the dark alleyway behind the club, the simmering war erupted into violence. Marcus and two of Julian's men intercepted a courier carrying a heavy duffel bag of cash meant for Julian's local distribution network. The courier was pinned against the brick wall, bleeding from a split lip. Standing over him was one of Chase's Miami hitmen, holding a silenced pistol. "Tell Julian that New Orleans is a coastal town now," the hitman hissed, before Marcus fired a shot from the shadows, sending the Miami men scattering into the dark. The gunfire echoed through the brick walls of the French Quarter, a stark reminder that the boundaries of their kingdom were failing and the turf war was turning into a bloodbath that threatened to consume everyone involved. The next morning, Evangeline received another delivery at her apartment, not flowers, but an antique silver-framed hand mirror. The glass was flawless, but etched into the silver backing was a small, delicate emblem of a flamingo, the calling card of the Miami Syndicate. A note attached read, "Look closely, Evangeline. Julian sees you as a prize to be guarded. I see you as a queen to be elevated. Choose wisely before the throne burns." Evangeline dropped the mirror onto her bed, her heart hammering. The secret admirer, the man who had sent the flowers and the $5,000 for her apartment, wasn't a phantom. It was Chase, Julian's mortal enemy. She was no longer just a singer in a club. She was the prize in a war between two billionaire drug lords. The physical toll of the stress and the rapid changes of her transition caught up to Evangeline during an afternoon rehearsal. A sudden, blinding dizziness washed over her, causing her to collapse onto the stage floor, gripping her chest as her breathing turned shallow. Trixie screamed for help, and within minutes, Julian had his private medical team rush her back to Dr. Charles's clinic. Julian stood pacing in the waiting room, his tailored suit rumpled, his usual calm demeanor completely shattered by terror for her safety. Dr. Charles emerged from the exam room, her face grim. "Her body is under extreme duress, Mr. Vance. The hormone therapy requires stability, and the stress you are introducing into her life is literally poisoning her. If you love her, you need to pull her out of this fire." Julian sat by Evangeline's bedside in the private clinic room, holding her mahogany hand gently between his own. The tough, untouchable Kingpin looked fragile in the dim, fluorescent light. "I didn't mean to bring the war to your door, Ava," he murmured, his voice cracking with uncharacteristic emotion. "I built this empire so no one could ever tell me no again. But if it destroys you, it means nothing." Evangeline opened her eyes, looking at the man who had won her over with a bet, but kept her with his heart. "They know about me, Julian," she whispered. "Chase knows. He's been sending me things. He funded my apartment." Julian's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles jumped, his tenderness instantly replacing itself with a cold, murderous fury. Back at the mahogany desk in his office, Julian gathered his entire leadership team. The table was covered in maps of the city, marked with drug routes and distribution hubs. "Chase has crossed the line," Julian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet whisper that chilled the room. "He didn't just touch our product. He targeted Evangeline. He's playing a psychological game trying to turn her against me." Marcus stepped forward, placing a heavy tactical map on the table. "We found their safe house near the docks, boss. They're preparing a massive shipment tonight. If we hit them now, we wipe Chase out of New Orleans for good." Julian stood up, buttoning his charcoal suit jacket. "Load up. Tonight, we end the Miami threat permanently." Despite Julian's orders to stay hidden at the clinic, Evangeline returned to her apartment to gather her medication. As she stepped into the living room, the lights flickered out, plunging the space into darkness. A hand slid over her mouth from behind, smelling of expensive beach cologne and sea salt. Chase stepped into her line of sight, his crystalline blue eyes gleaming in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Don't scream, Queen," he whispered, his grip firm but strangely gentle. "Julian's empire is falling tonight. I didn't send that money to buy you. I sent it to save you. Come to Miami with me before this city becomes your graveyard." Evangeline pulled away, her eyes flashing with regal fury. "I am not a prize for you to steal, Chase." At a deserted, fog-covered warehouse on the edge of the Mississippi River, Julian and his team launched their assault on the Miami safe house. Heavy gunfire erupted, the flashes of automatic weapons illuminating the swirling fog and stacking crates of contraband. Julian moved with lethal precision, firing his weapon as he advanced through the loading bay, desperate to eliminate Chase's operation. But as they cleared the main room, Marcus screamed out a warning. The warehouse was empty of product, rigged with tripwires and explosives. It wasn't a distribution hub. It was a carefully orchestrated trap designed by Chase to draw Julian out into the open, away from his stronghold, and away from Evangeline. Back at the apartment, the tension snapped. Julian burst through the door, his suit stained with soot and blood from escaping the warehouse blast, his weapon drawn. He stopped dead in his tracks as he saw Chase standing in the center of the living room, holding a gold-plated revolver directly to Evangeline's temple. Evangeline stood perfectly still, her chin held high with regal defiance, though a single tear slipped down her rich mahogany cheek. Chase smiled, a cold, psychopathic grin. "You're late, Vance," Chase mocked, tightening his grip. "The bayou is ours now. Drop the gun or your queen dies tonight." Julian's hand shook as he lowered his weapon, his eyes locked onto Evangeline's. Suddenly, a heavy, rhythmic boot step echoed from the open doorway behind Julian. The unmistakable scent of stale peppermint and church incense filled the room. Silas stepped out of the shadows, holding a shotgun leveled at all three of them. "None of you are leaving this room alive," Silas growled, his eyes burning with absolute self-righteous madness as the screen instantly cut to black with the deafening sound of a gunshot.